This video has been published on the dark web with the title, "The Dark Web is the Only Truth." In this video, we see a man celebrating his birthday, but nothing scary. But in the description, it says that this man would be 171 years old, and that he would have undergone several experiments to get to this point. What do you think?
They now taunt, humiliate, degrade the prisoners in front of each other.
From experiments in brainwashing to testing treatments and toxins on unwitting subjects, these terrifying human experiments are being dragged into the light. Up first are the Holm experiments. In the mid-30s, Sweden was struggling. Not with fascism like the rest of Europe, but with cavities. No one really knew how cavities happened, despite them being everywhere. But people had an idea that sugary foods may have been a cause. So what did the Swedish government do? They force-fed intellectually disabled patients at Holm Hospital with hyper-sugary treats. It became clear pretty quickly that sugar was very bad for the teeth, but the results were actually restricted for years because the sugar industry no longer wanted this study, which it had funded, to be published. It turns out the government also had no idea this experiment was happening, as it had been labeled as a vitamin experiment, except the vitamins were exchanged for sugar 2 years into the study. Next is Camera. Camera, or the Cell, was the central research facility for the Soviet Union's toxin programs. And like many things within the Soviet Union, Camera combined cutting-edge science with the inhuman cruelty of a lifetime of propaganda. For 70 years, from just after the revolution to the end of the Soviet Union, this secret laboratory would take prisoners from gulags to test on, going through thousands of inmates who, obviously, had no say in their treatment. Numerous compounds were tested in the search of an untraceable, untastable, unsmellable toxin, eventually coming up with K2, which has been rumored to be the toxin of choice for the current Russian government ever since, being used allegedly on numerous Russian nationals such as Alexei Navalny. Next are the Porton Down tests. From 1916 to 1989, the full length of the Cold War, the British government experimented on 20,000 British soldiers, testing different gases, toxins, chemicals, and biological agents. As one story among tens of thousands, in 1950, RAF engineer Ronald Madison was given a 200 milligram dose of sarin, a potent nerve agent. He had been told that he was testing a cure for the common cold. He did not survive. It wasn't only British soldiers either. Thousands of Indian soldiers were also experimented on against their knowledge within India. The full consequences of this illegal human experimentation hasn't fully been revealed, as some soldiers likely had little or minor impacts, while others perished on the spot. Most soldiers likely had an experience somewhere in the middle. Next is MKUltra. The Central Intelligence Agency is one of the most shadowy and unethical institutions in the nation and possibly the world, and MKUltra has come to exemplify exactly why they got that reputation. MKUltra was designed as an interrogation and brainwashing study and spent 20 years, that we know of, using every technique and method known to man to shatter people's minds and make them talk. This ranged from psychotropic substances and hypnosis to physical harm and repeated SA. In Germany, Japan, and the Philippines, they even established secret camps where they experimented on suspected spies and other expendables. The details of this program are utterly horrific, but even worse is that they don't even work. Oh, the CIA got very adept at shattering people's minds and breaking their connection with reality. It's just that people with shattered minds are completely useless for gaining information. They won't even realize that they're making things up. They're just so desperate to appease their captors that they will say anything to make the interrogation stop. This is why practically no usable information has ever been recovered this way, and actual information is gained through social engineering and rapport building. Next is Cantot Trovan. A lot of African nations have a pretty strong fear of doctors. Now, this isn't because of superstition or some fear of the modern. It is in fact very, very, very justified. In 1996, just as an example, Pfizer went to Nigeria during a meningitis outbreak and falsified a letter of approval for human trials. They gave 100 youths a very weak dose of the leading meningitis treatment, and another 100 youths their own antibiotic, Trovan, trying to skew the numbers in their favor. 11 youths would perish in the study, and many others suffered long-lasting health effects. Pfizer knew that the antibiotic was known to cause rather severe side effects, especially in juveniles, but leapt into human experimentation as soon as possible. They took advantage of the fear of a disadvantaged population during an outbreak that took 12,000 lives, and told them either you participate in our study, which we won't fully disclose all the risks for, or you get no treatment at all. Next is the Becker Paper. In 1966, Henry Beecher, an accomplished doctor and researcher in his own right, published an analysis of 22 papers. These papers had all been widely published in widely read and respected medical journals. They were also all on incredibly unethical studies. In one study published, the subject was told they were going to be injected with some cells, while not being told these were cancer cells that they were being subjected to. The publishing of this analysis finally brought to the public's attention, for the first time really, the massive and rampant issue of unethical human experimentation. Experiments that were being published by respected researchers in world-renowned journals. The Beecher paper would lead to the establishment of the first ethics boards and committees, which seems like an obvious no-brainer now, but simply didn't exist in the 1960s. And finally, our frostbite tests. Have you ever wondered why we know so much about frostbite and how to treat it? Well, you have the horrific Unit 731 and Hisato Yoshimura to thank. Actually, please don't thank them. They do not deserve your respect. They took hundreds of people and experimented by freezing different parts solid and then trying out different techniques to thaw and heal them. Heal is a bit of a stretch, as the vast majority of test subjects simply had utterly inhumane and horrific things done to them. Hisato Yoshimura was despised even by other members of Unit 731. These are people who are testing fire throwers and diseases on live subjects, and Hisato was so brutal even they called him a cold-blooded animal. For the rest of his life, Hisato would show zero remorse for the hundreds of lives he took, and was granted clemency by the United States in exchange for his research.
Have a look at this terrifying mouse with a human-like ear. This little rodent is known as the Vacanti mouse, and it is the result of a very bizarre experiment. The creature was originally named after the scientist who conducted the experiment, Charles Vacanti. He decided that he wanted to try a new way to grow human organs and creatures that could be used in transplant surgeries. His idea was to use cartilage from a smaller human organ and inject it into an already living creature. Now this is a stark contrast from what is usually done in this scenario, where a scientist will inject cells into an unborn embryo. There was no telling how this one was going to end up, but the results were absolutely shocking. The mouse that was injected with the human ear cartilage ended up growing a human ear on its backside. This one seriously looked like it was genetically modified by the Umbrella Corporation. The scientific community had very mixed reactions to this experiment. While Vacanti proved that human organs could be grown with this new method, it ended up giving the tiny rodent a horrific transformation. The Vacanti method has been used on other creatures since the first experiment, but the original Vacanti mouse has to be the creepiest of them all. This mad scientist actually placed goat testes inside human beings. Yes, you heard that correctly. One crazy doctor actually believed that goat testes were the magical cure for human impotence. John R. Brinkley was not a licensed doctor, but that did not stop him from conducting some truly bizarre experiments in the 20s and 30s. It seemed like people were already well aware of his eccentric behavior, but his goat testes experiment really stole the show. It's a total mystery how he came to the conclusion that this was the cure for impotence, but people were actually buying what he was selling. While most people decided that he was completely insane, he still ended up receiving a long line of customers who wanted the scary surgery. There was obviously no internet during this time and very limited resources to fact check his claims, so these customers truly believed that a goat's reproductive organs were the solution to their problems. Of course, the experiment was not working and people were complaining about all sorts of nasty side effects. It wasn't until 1939 when a libel suit was finally launched against Brinkley, which shut him down for good. There's no telling how many people received this terrible experiment. It's honestly a miracle that we don't have any goat-human hybrids walking around in the modern era. Have a look at this terrifying two-headed dog. Why anyone thought this was going to be a good idea is a total mystery. That didn't stop one scientist from completing this horror film-esque experiment. Soviet scientist Vladimir Demikov decided that he was going to create a two-headed dog. He had a very strange way of doing it. He decided to use one dog as the host for the procedure and made a careful incision on its backside for where it was going to grow its new head. But this wasn't a matter of injecting the dog with any cells and growing a new head on its own. Instead, Demikov decided to take the head and neck from a completely different breed and sewed it onto the host. He managed managed to keep the second head alive while performing the surgery and carefully attach it to its new body. After a few hours of vascular reconstruction and tying all the tubes together, Demikov's creepy two-headed dog was complete. The second head was able to use all of its senses while being supported by the host, but the result was horrifying to say the least. It looked like another dog was growing out of the host's back, and the fact it was a completely different breed made it even scarier. Let's just hope that this creepy experiment is never replicated again in the future. What you're looking at here is the Eastern Amaryllis sea slug, and is actually the first plant-animal hybrid. With that in mind, this piece of literal living lettuce is incredibly strange. This one did not require any sort of human intervention to undergo a very bizarre transformation during its rather eventful life cycle. This little creature eats a ton of algae in its underwater environment, but it probably had no idea that it would literally turn into the exact same thing it was eating. After consuming so much algae over its lifetime, the sea slug has actually transformed into a leafy green blob that many people have described as a piece of living lettuce. In addition to its complete and total makeover, the sea slug has also gained the ability to produce its own chlorophyll. This is the substance that allows plants to soak in sunlight and use it for energy. Now, this is how the Eastern Amaryllis was able to become the world's first plant-animal hybrid, but it also means it has two unique ways of surviving. While every other living creature requires food to keep on living, the Eastern Amaryllis could technically survive off of sunlight alone. This one has really puzzled scientists for a long time, but also means that some researchers will more than likely try to replicate this process for themselves in the future. Here is the world's angriest bee species that is the direct result of a crossbreeding experiment gone wrong. The Africanized bee was supposed to be a quick fix to restore bee populations and ramp up honey production, but it looks like scientists bit off a little bit more than they could chew. These hybrid creatures are the direct result of an East African lowland honeybee mating with a European honeybee. Although they may look very similar to other bee species on the outside, these little creatures actually have a terrible temper that is very dangerous. When beekeepers were transporting the first colony of these creatures to South America, a large group of them escaped captivity and created a ton of problems. Researchers quickly became aware that these bees were far more aggressive than a natural species, and now they had just been released into the public. The Africanized bees were quickly spreading across the continent, and it looked like the scientists had absolutely no way of controlling them. While the idea of preserving the bee population seemed like a pretty good idea at first, it looks like this wasn't the best method for doing it. And that wraps up our look at the classified crossbreed experiments that went horribly wrong. Thanks so much for tuning in, everybody, and we'll see you all next time.
Want to see more videos like this one? Check out this video next. It's about strange anomalies that were found in the Amazon rainforest. We have delved deep into the mysteries of the jungle to see what we could find, and the answers might shock you. What are you waiting for? Click the video now to find out more.